All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We are about to condense roughly 3 billion years of history into one single breathtaking narrative arc. We're going to trace the grand, incredibly messy, and absolutely fascinating story of our species. We'll be zooming way out to look at the massive patterns that define human existence. It's a story of raw survival, wild ingenuity, and this relentless ambition that literally shaped the world we live in today.
So I really want you to keep this one big question in the back of your mind as we trace humanity's journey. How in the world did we go from tiny floating atoms in a planetary petri dish to becoming the architects of global dominance? Like, how did a species that actually shrunk in physical size when we first settled down manage to build these massive pyramids, cross entire oceans, and draft incredibly complex laws? It's a transformation that completely defies the odds, taking us from simple foragers just trying to survive the day to engineers capable of reshaping the Earth itself.
We've got a ton of ground to cover today, so here's our roadmap. First, the seeds of civilization. Second, philosophers, kings, and empires. Third, the fall and the rise. Fourth, faith, conquest, and plague. And finally, towards the modern age.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Seeds of Civilization from Foraging to Farming.
Okay, let's hit the fast forward button on prehistory for a second. We're leaping from early hominids right into Mesopotamia around 4000 BCE. This right here is the critical turning point. The invention of agriculture allowed cities like Uruk to absolutely boom to 50,000 people. We basically traded our hunter-gatherer mobility to settle down and harvest cereal grains like wheat and barley. And it's wild because this dramatic change in diet actually shrunk the average human height and brought on whole new diseases. But the trade-off was immense. It allowed our populations to just explode, laying the crucial groundwork for everything that comes next.
Naturally, as these early farming societies grew, they started stratifying into super complex hierarchies. Take ancient Egypt, for instance. It became this incredibly rigid social pyramid. Every single layer, from the peasants and slaves doing all the back-breaking manual labor at the bottom, up through your artisans, merchants, soldiers, and scribes in the middle, was organized with one singular purpose. The whole shebang was engineered to maintain order and serve the immortal ambitions of the pharaoh at the very top, who acted as the supreme mediator to the gods. Now, what is absolutely wild about King Hammurabi is how he transformed Babylon into a society governed by written law. He erected this massive 7-foot stone slab engraved with 282 really strict rules. And this early legal code proves that ancient civilization had zero illusions about human equality. I mean, none. Your punishment, your rights, and your inherent value in society depended entirely on whether you were born a noble, a commoner, or a slave. It was a brutal system for sure, but it set a precedent of codified order that would influence empires for millennia. Moving right along to Section 2, philosophers, kings, and empires, order and chaos. Imagine you're a peasant in ancient China, locked into this exhausting, endless cycle of agricultural feudalism. How do you cope? Well, two very contrasting philosophies emerged to make that strenuous life bearable. On one hand, you had Confucianism, that offered a strict sense of order, duty, and social ritual, giving people a very clear place and purpose within a rigid hierarchy. On the flip side, you had Taoism, which encouraged individuals to find peace by aligning with the natural flow of the universe, the Tao, and just letting go of the harsh realities outside their control. Together, these ideas acted like a psychological survival toolkit for a really tough existence. Meanwhile, over in ancient Greece, we see a totally different approach to order, defined by this incredible contrast. On one side, Sparta, a ruthless military powerhouse where society was geared entirely toward churning out highly disciplined warriors. They went so far as to abandon weak infants, just brutal. On the other side was Athens, this messy, vibrant, highly experimental democracy. Here, a randomly selected council of 500 and a massive, chaotic assembly of up to 30,000 everyday citizens would just loudly debate and vote on their own future, laying down the very first foundations of civic participation.
32. Just think about that for a second. That is the age Alexander the Great was when he died in Babylon. He had been tutored by Aristotle, the father of logic, and he used those sharp scientific teachings to strategically conquer the known world. By the time he hit 32, he'd crushed the mighty Persian Empire and marched his armies all the way to India. He spread Greek culture, language, and thought globally. Right before his sudden, totally unexpected death completely fractured his massive empire into warring factions. And that brings us to Section 3, the fall and the rise, the cycle of empires. So there's this chilling thought from Machiavelli that it is much safer to be feared than loved. And honestly, it perfectly explains the underlying psychology of this era. Why on earth did ordinary farmers willingly subject themselves to tyrannical empires like Rome or Qin dynasty China? Well, because they traded their freedom for protection. They endured heavy taxes and incredibly strict laws because they were terrified of what rival warlords or invading nomadic hordes would do to them if that powerful imperial shield wasn't standing in the way. 2,100. That is the staggering amount of gold, in pounds, mind you, that the Eastern Roman Empire paid out every single year in tribute, just to keep Attila the Hun from burning Constantinople to the ground. Think about the psychological weight of that extortion. Even safely behind their supposedly impenetrable walls, the Romans recognized the sheer terror the Huns brought with them. So, they opted to drain their own treasury, paying a literal king's ransom annually, rather than face the absolute annihilation that Attila promised. Meanwhile, over in China, they had this fascinating repeating political cycle called the Mandate of Heaven. It dictated the rise and fall of massive dynasties like the Zhou, Qin, Han, and Ming, and it brilliantly justified both absolute power and inevitable rebellion. The idea was, if a ruler lost his virtue, the heavens would supposedly send droughts, floods, or earthquakes. This was the ultimate cosmic signal to the people that, hey, it's time to rebel and install a new dynasty. It guaranteed that supreme power, no matter how absolute it seemed at its peak, was never, ever permanent. All right, let's shift into Section 4, Faith, Conquest, and Plague, the Darker Ages. In this era, we see the explosive rise of both Christianity and Islam. What started as very localized, profound events, like the crucifixion of Jesus or the revelations received by Muhammad, eventually transformed into these sweeping geopolitical forces. Over the centuries, these movements expanded and collided, culminating in massive events like the Battle of Tours, which halted Arab expansion in Europe, and eventually giving way to hundreds of years of bloody crusades, where huge armies violently clashed over sacred lands in the Middle East. Now, while the West is all tangled up in these religious squabbles, Genghis Khan comes along and completely bypasses all of it. By uniting 1 million Mongolians in 1206, he actually implemented absolute religious freedom in his ranks. He focused his people's energy entirely on pure expansion. Utilizing highly mobile cavalry, calculated terror, and ruthless psychological tactics, like literally using captured civilians as human shields, his formidable horde swept from the Sea of Japan to the Caspian Sea, forging the largest contiguous land empire in human history. But for all the human conquerors out there, they were absolutely nothing compared to nature. 75 to 200 million, that unimaginable number represents the lives wiped out by the bubonic plague. Spread by fleas on rats stowing away on merchant ships traveling the Silk Road, this invisible killer absolutely devastated global populations. Yet, what's truly fascinating is the twist in the aftermath. It inadvertently gave surviving peasants incredible leverage. With labor suddenly so scarce, ordinary working people could finally demand better rights, higher wages, and actually keep more of the wealth they generated. And that leads us to our final chapter, Section 5, Towards the Modern Age, Discoveries and Revolutions. It is honestly mind-blowing how fast the world flips upside down in this window. In less than a 200-year span, the ancient Byzantine Empire falls to the Ottomans, completely closing off old trade routes to the east. Soon after that, Columbus accidentally stumbles into the Americas. Martin Luther radically fractures the all-powerful Catholic Church with his 95 Theses. And the European colonization of the Americas shifts the center of global wealth and power forever, setting off this massive chain reaction of wars and treaties. There's this immense, tragic irony when we look at the Americas. It was a devastating clash of advanced worlds. We're talking about highly sophisticated native civilizations here. The Aztecs were building complex canal systems and floating gardens in massive lake cities like Tenochtitlan, and the Incas were mastering the harsh, high-altitude environments of the Andes Mountains. Yet, they were completely decimated. And it wasn't just European military tech like guns and cannons that defeated them. The true conquerors were invisible pathogens like smallpox and the plague, to which the native populations had absolutely zero biological immunity. So we wrap up this historical speedrun right around 1776. This radical document, drafted in the Americas, fundamentally rejected the old world order of God-ordained kings and inherent social classes. Paired with Adam Smith's new economic theories of free markets, which, by the way, were published that exact same year, these revolutionary ideas sparked the dawn of modern democracies.
They replaced the divine right of monarchs with the unalienable rights of the individual, setting the very foundation for the highly connected, fast-paced world we live in today.
Which leaves us here. Based on all these epic cycles we've tracked today, from tiny farming villages in Mesopotamia to the violent rise and collapse of Rome, China, and sprawling empires across the globe, I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. As history endlessly repeats its rhythm of ambition, expansion, and eventual collapse, look around at our own modern world. What is the next chapter of human civilization going to look like?